Mzwandile Banjathwa Project Coordinator at Corruption Watch joins us now to talk more about this particular issue. Thank you so much, Mr. Banjathwa, for your time. Now, before I get into, the allegations around, the scandal involving the MEC of Health, that's Mzwandile Masuku, as well as other, government officials, I want to touch on, the Corruption Watch's report. You have conducted some research into, some corruption and irregularities when it comes to procurement, amongst other things. This just around, the health sector, but I also understand that this does affect PPE. Just take me through that briefly, please.
Yeah, from 2012 until to date, we've received over 28,000 reports of alleged corruption, and about 700 of those reports pertain to the health sector. So of those reports, we find that about 52% of these reports actually emanate from provincial government, whereas the 40% comes from national government. Gauteng is actually taking a lead on those reports, with 39% of those reports coming from Gauteng. We have KZN at 16% and the Eastern Cape and Mpumalanga tied at 8%. So the prevalent forms of corruption that we tend to find or that are reported would be the employment corruption at 39%, and there is procurement corruption at 22% and misappropriation of resources at 16%. So now these would tend to vary from provinces to province. In the Northern Cape, for example, we get the least number of reports, but of those reports, we find that about 55% point to employment corruption, where in Limpopo, on the other hand, 50% of those reports are procurement related corruption allegations, and the Eastern Cape ranks high on the misappropriation of resources with 26%.
So this is just a summary of how we're looking nationally, but let's zone in now to Gauteng. That number's quite staggering, or at least that percentage, standing at 52%, this within the province. Now, you mentioned the provincial, of course, governments also being a part of, some of the allegations we're seeing here. Even news coming in that the health MEC of the country, has been named as one of those who might have unduly benefited. Does this come as a surprise? Are we seeing more names being mentioned, or at least being tipped off in terms of just corruption around, the procurement of PPE within Gauteng?
So in essence, what we are getting, or rather the culprits in the reports that are coming to our attention, would typically be your high-ranking public officials who would occupy managerial posts, and there are also administrators, and unfortunately there are also medical professionals like your doctors and nurses as well. But there's also that collusion between the high-ranking officials and companies that are either bidding to do business with the state and those that are already doing business with the state. So the implication, or the purported implication of higher ranking officials being implicated in some of the allegation would not necessarily come as a shock to us as an organization.
Yeah, you mentioned the collusion, and I want to talk more about the involvement of, the alleged government officials who have been found, of course, to have been, reported to being participants in corruption, particularly in Gauteng. How exactly are you monitoring their involvement? How are they particularly found to be involved in corruption?
So they're found in multiplicity of ways. Either, firstly, in the appointment of various companies and various individuals to be employed. This comes when there are unilateral decisions that are taken, particularly by senior ranking officials, or where we find that when there is supposed to be consultation, for example, when there is supposed to be a panel that is set up, there would be that one dominant voice which would dictate the direction of that particular tender or direction of that particular appointment. We find that when there is consultation, when consultation happens, actually, there is that coercion that tends to happen. But we find that in most cases, there are bribes that are paid to senior officials. We have heard in some of the instances where some of the bribes even amount to 10% of the overall contract. we know that these contracts would go and amount to about millions and millions of rands as we speak.
When we talk about this particular case then involving the presidential spokesperson Kusela Diko, her husband, as well as the MEC of Health Bandile Masuku, this obviously are allegations at this point pending further investigation. But for you as an organization, as the Corruption Watch, have you received any tip-off, any information, any reports whatsoever regarding this particular case involving these particular government officials?
No, unfortunately, we haven't received direct reports which implicate these two senior officials. And I suppose even if that might have been the case, there would still be investigation to sort of validate or verify those allegations before we could come and speak about that particular matter. But just generally touching on these senior officials, we know that Kusela Diko is a politically exposed person, and it won't be the first time a politically exposed person is marred in such controversy. Similarly with the MEC, so it's very important that that they trade carefully in the future when these things are actually happening. But another problem is that what we find is that there are these blurring of lines between the state and political parties. And this tends to affect how investigations are conducted and subsequently how prosecution are undertaken. So these tend to block a lot of convictions that we would otherwise see.
Now, you do warn senior government officials to be very cautious, to be very careful. And I assume this is when it comes to, issues pertaining to procurement of, either its goods or services, and as far as doing business with a government. What are the implications of senior government officials found to being involved, to be doing business either directly or perhaps through spouse or even any one of their immediate family members doing business with government? What are the implications there?
So there are various legislations that are put in place. I mean, we know the Financial Intelligence Centers Act that has been put in place, which clearly states the implications. We know that there are other pieces of legislation which actually guides how members of, or rather senior officials should behave and how they should actually disclose their business interest or business interest of their family members to avoid being found in these scandals. Firstly, there is a trust deficit that is greatly going up in South Africa between the state and members of the public. So to have a senior official who's marred in these controversy doesn't boast well and does not necessarily help in shortening that deficit. But people can also be criminally charged. Senior official could be criminally charged if they are found to be doing state business with the state without them declaring those interests.
Now, as a sign of further warning then to the state, Mr. Banjathwa, should there be a call for concern for the state, for the law, as well as the public to be aware of any corruption with regards to PPE that might be happening in other parts of the country? This, of course, including Gauteng, as we've spoken about extensively. But is there reason to believe that there might be further colluding for the procurement, irregularities and, price fixing or even, bribes involving senior government officials in other provinces within this country that you would like to make us aware of?
I think the greatest challenge here is about the lack of transparency, which leads to a lack of accountability that has been happening for a very longest of all times. We know that civil society organizations have already written a letter as far back as May to the president, making various calls to first involve civil society organizations who are already active in the fight against corruption to sort of assist in monitoring and grant them access to some of these details. We know that we have also asked to be involved in sort of monitoring all of these amounts and how they are allocated and how they are actually spent. We know that if that had happened, there would at this particular time be being clearly, we would know clearly who are the implicated parties And by now, there would have been investigations which are leading into prosecution, and subsequently we would be speaking of convictions as we stand.
All right, we have to leave there, but thank you so much, Mr. Mzwandile Banjathwa, the Corruption Watch Project Coordinator. Thank you for your time.